Okay, folks, so we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly Dungeon Muser this evening. Tonight, it is Sunday, December 19th, 2021, and this is one of the last streams that we have scheduled for the channel. Actually, I didn't have it scheduled, so I guess I'm lying from the outset. One of the last streams we're going to be hosting from now until the end of the year, until we roll into 2022. At the time of recording, we just wrapped up our final session of Cult Divinity Lost, our ongoing campaign that we've been calling Those Left Behind. And we have one more session planned on this coming Wednesday, and then we are off the air, as it were, from now until January 5th. And at the time of recording, this is only, I think it's less than a month since my last sort of State of the Union, or it's around that range, 4 or 5 weeks at the most. So, and in that one, I did cover an awful lot of, the most of the year, and then also the state of where the games were at the time of what we've been playing on the channel, and what I had planned for the end of the year and then into the new year. And we've had a chance to run a few of the games actually, from that last video. But because I had gone into such depth in that one about many of the games that we had run, almost all the ones I think that we had run, I at least gave some attention to. I thought what I would do with this video as sort of a wrapping up of 2021 is a couple of things. For one, just to look back on the entire year, as it were, and see if there were any lessons that I feel like I may have learned for the coming year, for scheduling things on the channel or running things on the channel, what games I felt were effective in terms of the planning, execution, and whatnot. And what I'm not going to do this time is spend any time on games that I felt either that I felt did not work, or games that I felt were or things that just I don't have immediate plans or immediate passion to get back to the channel. And the reason I'm choosing to do that is, I mean, regular viewers of this channel and of listeners of my podcast will know that I don't like dwelling on things that are negative. There's more than enough positive stuff in the role-playing community and role-playing habit. I may have had a Freudian slip there. Hobby to dwell on or talk about. So I don't want to worry about things that either did not work or I felt did not work or whatnot. So there may be games that I've run over the past year that I'm not going to talk about. It doesn't mean that I don't like them. It doesn't mean that they're not great. It's just that in terms of where I am as a DM and where we are as a channel, I'm just not planning on those coming back anytime soon. As regular viewers will know, though, that my plans rarely stay as they are. But I think it's good to have an idea of kind of where you want to be going. So to that end, what I want to talk about today or tonight is I want to talk about the state of the state of play that we've got on the channel right now. I want to talk about some of the factors that I feel have shaped some of the things that I have run over the last little bit, and that's based on recent experience with not only with some of the games we've run, but also in my planning for said games. So it'll be interesting to do that. Let me just get my there we go, got the stream up as well. I'm also going to talk about some of the games that really knocked my socks off in 2021. So the games that really, either as soon as I finished running it or, even in the course of prepping for the game, I really kind of fell in love with them and really felt that they were a terrific fit for my sensibilities, for the type of games that myself and players in the roster like playing. And just give you my thoughts on those, and in particular why I think they were as effective, or why they really, what it was about them that really knocked my socks off. And then I'm going to talk about some other games as well too. And again, these other games, I've got positive things to say about them. It's just that they're not the ones that really, that really blew me away. The ones that I could not wait to get back to the table, or I couldn't believe how fast the time went, or things like that. And the reason I want to make that distinction, in part, is for myself, right? Just to clarify for myself, to remember this is stuff that really, hit really well. One of these, in fact, because we had a couple of really good games run afterwards, I'd kind of forgotten how much I enjoyed it until I went and rewatched part of the stream, or most of the stream. and remembered like, oh shit, that was that was a really good session. That was a really good game and a really good session. And I'd like to see more of that. So, and then I want to talk a little bit as well too. This is not in order necessarily, but I'm also going to talk about the charity initiatives on the channel, because since October of 2021, we've not had a way of making donations, and I want to kind of explain where we are with that and what I'm planning, or at least what the plan to make a plan is for the coming year. So without further ado, let's get to the games. So games that have been ongoing all year are really, let's see here. There has been Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, going in order of the oldest games until the youngest games of the ongoing ones. Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, that's playing Jeff Talanian's very awesome second edition Ash game, and as of tomorrow, I got the email today, tomorrow morning we'll be receiving the PDFs. Anyone who backed the Kickstarter, that is, will be receiving the PDFs of third edition, so that's pretty exciting to get to see that and start planning with that for the coming year. In the coming campaign, we've also had our ongoing Night Below campaign, which just hit its second year anniversary about 9 days ago. Was our second anniversary of that game, and I can't believe how fast that game has reached 2 years. And I'm sure I'm not alone in how this past year in particular has just flown by. You know, like, I can't believe that 2021 is over, and I'm sure there's a lot of factors that obviously the most pressing and the most impacting on everyone's lives is likely to be the pandemic, and it certainly is for me. Life has been so different since the pandemic began in terms of working from home and the way that I socialize and the way that I go out and whatnot. And that has not, that has had obviously a substantial effect on everyone's life, but it also has meant that 2021 has been my busiest year. My day job, it's quite busy. It has been quite busy in the channel as well. One of the things I decided not to do for this year wrap up, every past year wrap up, I've kind of done a breakdown of like the hours played. And I don't really care about that right now, to be honest. The prospect of counting up the hours that we played and how much time. I know we played a lot, and I think as much as we did in the previous year in 2020, perhaps a little less because I did take a vacation this year, which I didn't in 2021. And one of the things that has been a real pleasure is seeing how that Night Below campaign and the Ash game and our Legacy of the Crystal Shard campaign, which has been on Sundays. Legacy was a campaign that was started off using AD&D second edition that was initially supposed to be something for the players in the roster to give them an excuse to keep busy or something to do in the initial stages of the pandemic. And then we had at one point had like 9 players with it, which was crazy. And then that sort of petered down to a core group of about 5 or 6 players. And we've recently added a new player to that campaign as well. Both that and Night Below Night Below has been, both of those games have not suffered, but have been affected by, in the last half of the year, changes that I made to when we were playing. For both those games, at least for Night Below, we were playing on Wednesdays and Fridays, and then on for the Legacy of the Crystal Shard game, for the first half of the year, we were playing every second Sunday and then or every second Saturday and then every Sunday. So it was always the game, and we got a lot of gameplay in for that first little bit. And what that did is allowed me to sort of focus on one or two campaigns I'm running on the channel. And then as life kind of slowly started getting back to normal, or at least some semblance of normal, and people started to be able to have more in their life than just sitting at home, we started seeing a less frequent attendance at that game. So I had shifted it to being just on one day, once every 2 weeks. And that seems to have helped stabilize the player base with that. We've had a couple of times over the summer where it's been difficult to schedule that session. We run fill-in games, but for the ongoing games, that's where we stand with those. We also currently have ongoing a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition campaign set in Ravnica, in the plain-sized city of Ravnica from Magic the Gathering. And we also have let me see here, what's on our other one? Oh, and then we currently have a Cult Divinity Lost campaign that we've been playing, which is based in Detroit, in modern-day Detroit, and it's a modern, modern horror kind of game, not in the Cthulhu or Lovecraftian kind of vein, but just really its own thing. And then we also have on Fridays, we've been sort of alternating between a bunch of different campaigns. Well, not a bunch, but a few campaigns, including 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons version of Barrow Maze, the amazing horror dungeon written for the OSR products, or like basic D&D or BX D&D by Dr. Greg Gillespie. And that's also been supplanted recently by a 5th edition hack of the World of Warcraft. So it's a World of Warcraft, well, it's a hack of the 5th edition, but it's a set of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons rules for playing like the classes and the characters and whatnot from the World of Warcraft game. And that one has been an enormous amount of fun as well. So that's where we are with our ongoing games. The thing I realize, I guess the thing I learned from the ongoing campaigns from that year is, I mean, for one, the selection of game system is pretty critical for those, because I did find when we played some Savage Worlds over the lead up to our annual gaming marathon and through the marathon and then afterwards, that I felt that the XP system was having the characters outpace the power level of what I was wanting at the table. And with a game, when you're running a campaign that's going to run like our Night Below our AD&D second edition Night Below game is at 137 sessions, I believe, right now, and the Legacy of the Crystal Shard is into its 70s, and the Ash game, I believe it is in its 60s right now. And if you're going to play that long and still like award XP and whatnot after every session, you need to make sure you are running something that is going to allow for that character growth over that time, but not and have it at a pace that is what you want for the for the campaign. Now, it's not for nothing that those ongoing games are all based in the old school. They're all old school games that are designed sort of to have that pacing of the advancement paired with sort of what you're doing in the session. And by that I mean, if you're fighting monsters and defeating monsters, you're going to get XP from that. If you're recovering loot or magic items or whatnot, you're going to get XP for that. That's both Ash and AD&D Second do that. And the other thing I think that is interesting about those games is that because I've been thinking a lot lately after running a bunch of one-shots and a bunch of more structured sessions and more story-focused kind of games where I've got an idea of what I want to have happen in a session, whether that's because it's a one-shot and we want to be done by the end or, whatever. I don't necessarily do that when I'm running the ongoing games. I'll have some ideas for what I think might happen, but I largely leave it to what the players choose to do. And in all of those games, there is a degree of autonomy, like a greater degree of autonomy into where they go and what they do, I think, than I have in other games. There's less of I'm not sure in any of those games there's really a mechanism by which the story or quests are being fed. The players are aware of what's going on in each of those campaigns, but then they decide what to do and where to go. In our Ash game, they are on a quest right now, but they were quite easily they sort of not distracted, but the game then became for a brief period about this other thing they learned about. They dealt with that, and now they're back onto their main their main kind of mission, as it were, for this. One of my favorite NPCs I've ever introduced, the Monkey Meister, and a guy who has cybernetics and cybernetic apes that are his servants as well. So I was channeling my Mike Mignola as much as I could for that character. So I mean, one of the things that I guess I draw from that is for one, I love having the selection of the system, for one, that accommodates the kind of advancement that you need over the long term to allow for the characters to continue occupying the same kind of story, difficulty level or power level that you expect them to. A lot of I think a lot of folks will say that that the escalation in D&D, like, oh, you get so powerful so quickly, and then the characters are what were farmers have now suddenly become superheroes. And in modern games where there is a more cognizant effort to try and make sure you're getting a new level after every X amount of encounters, maybe that's true. That's not the case in these old school games. Even though you do get more XP for things that adversaries you face at higher levels, for magic items that you find at higher levels, for the spells you cast and the whatever else, all the class-based XP that we use in our AD&D second games, the thing is that it really does slow down at a certain point, and in particular if you're spending time role-playing. If you have sessions where there is a lot of social interaction or problem solving that doesn't result in defeating high XP creatures or recovering shit tons of gold or crazy magic items or whatnot, when there is just the reward is things that are happening in the fiction or in the story or in the setting, then it isn't the same. That doesn't help you progress on that track. But I think because it becomes such a large gap in some cases, even if you're having a really heavily combat-oriented game, the focus for the players is less on that end goal, less on that next level, and more on whatever is happening. The game definitely paces itself quite well. I haven't been stingy with my XP rewards, and the players have certainly faced their share more than they might say of the adversaries, of monsters and stuff like that they fought. But they're not flying up in levels. This is quite some time ago, but we had someone who is now blocked from the channel because, I don't need to fucking hear from you. But they were bitching. One of the things they were bitching about was how the advancement was. They didn't feel that the advancement was as fast as it should be. Like, oh, if you're at 100 sessions in and your character is only 6th level, that's not a good pace of play. And it's like, well, a good pace of play is whatever is right for your table, for one. And secondly, unless you are deciding, one of the things that we don't house rule in our games at least is how fast characters gain XP. Like, I don't fudge XP, I don't under reward, and I don't over reward either. So with that in mind, like, this is the way that you see these characters in those games play out and pace out and advance. That's kind of as written. Like, that's the game as designed. That's the pace of play. They're not supposed to reach 20th level within a year, because that's not how the XP mechanics work. And so that's one way where I think that then the focus for the players becomes more what's happening either in the instant or what's happening in the story. That's the thing that becomes engaging. Not necessarily the plot, I mean also the interaction with each other. The way that the NPCs, the players, and by not NPCs, the player characters and the players react with each other and talk about each other in our Night Below campaign, in our Legacy of the Crystal Shard campaign, in our Ash campaign. They all talk about each other like they are long-term friends. I mean, we all are now because we've been playing together for several years, but it also has that carryover to the connection that the players have to each other and to what their characters want is fantastic, and it's something that I don't, obviously, I think any long-term campaign would have that happen as well, but it's an interesting focus on in that particular game, because there isn't the focus on, you're not deciding what feats you're going to take at the next level. You're not deciding on what magic items you're going to craft, because it's pretty hard to do that in or expensive to do that in AD&D. And you also have to be a certain level in order to do that. The players are not, or the player characters are not there yet. And the other thing is because it's long-term, the successes that they see take a long time to get there. It also, I think, gives the characters more of a sense of satisfaction, because that's the thing. They don't finish a big session or a big accomplishment and then hit a level necessarily. They complete the accomplishment and whatnot, and then that is the reward in and of itself. When they defeated Malfashionacor, let's say, at the bottom of the what is it, Thorn? I can't remember what it's called now. Heathertop Warren. The success of accomplishment, I think, was story-based. Like, we didn't hit the end of it and then also say, and now you gain levels, right? Like, it's something that happens over the course of the campaign. And it's not to say that those are anticlimactic. It just means that the rewards and the satisfaction you get from those accomplishments is the accomplishment. I think maybe one or two characters did ding after, say, their recent adventure with the Queen of the Mire, this big, ancient green dragon. And but I don't think that necessarily. I know that they didn't universally all advance levels, but I think the sense of accomplishment came from the story as opposed to, and what they did as opposed to the mechanical thing. And the reason I mention all this stuff is because it makes me think of something I've suspected for a long time about Traveller and about Call of Cthulhu. Because one of the things that is interesting about those games is that because there is not, and I'm talking about like sort of classic, Traveller, or even like the Mongoose version of Traveller, or the classic Call of Cthulhu. Not Pulp Cthulhu. What you have is a very bare bones set of stats for your character. Like you have your skills and you have your capabilities. So like that helps dictate what things you're good at or you're bad at. But you don't really have anything beyond that. There's no like feats or talents or advantages or whatever you want to call the character distinguishing elements. And what that means is your imagination and your role-playing is going to be injecting a lot more about what that character is as opposed to their mechanical benefits. You're not talking about, okay, so you're the healer, you're the damage dealer, you're the whatever. It's more a matter of like, to a degree, you'll I'm sure figure out what certain skills characters are good at, although it's Call of Cthulhu, so like everyone's going to have library use and everyone's going to have, research or whatever. But the thing that is interesting about those games is because the mechanical side of it is just not terribly complex in comparison to some other games. It means that you are investing more attention into the actual game, because you can't. And I guess a more negative way of looking at that is that you cannot pay more attention to the game mechanics because they're just not there. Now, this is neither good nor bad. It depends on what you want from your campaign and what you want for the players to have as their play experience. But I think it's an interesting thing I have observed about this. Our AD&D campaigns is, and our Ash campaign is that it's pretty. I'm not sure, and because it's just not the way the game plays, I'm not hearing people talking about like, God, I can't wait to hit X level to get this spell and whatever else. There may be players who are thinking that stuff, but it's just not coming up in play, and they're much more interested in just playing the game than getting advancement or getting a certain magic item or whatever, because again, it's just not part of the game. So because of that, the focus and the enjoyment on the game comes from the play itself. And I think the added benefit of long-term play with those games is that that's where you get the self-referential sort of feedback loop where things become more important in an ongoing campaign because if you make reference to what has come before. That's why, Call of Cthulhu, I think, has so many long-term campaigns, right? Like with the Horror in the Orient Express and Masks of Nyarlathotep and At the Mountains of Madness. Like, these campaigns work well because it's the accumulation of story and events and experiences that make that experience, that play so special. Same thing with Traveller. It's you going around, and if you're doing a default Traveller campaign, it's the crazy adventures you get involved in along the way. You don't have an advancement system, at least in rules is written for Traveller. You do for Call of Cthulhu, so like I recognize that you do learn and get experience and change with the if you make a successful roll, you tick it off and then you roll and see if you gain skills. But it's not necessarily something you really have, not anything you really have agency over, and you're just getting better at things. You're not like changing the way that you are able to interact with the rules mechanics, just you're getting better at them. And again, it's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just the way the game works, and by virtue of that, it means that if you do want to interrogate the game more or think about the game away from the table, what you're thinking about is what happened, not necessarily what you're going to do differently to build your character, as it were. And I'd be interested to see whether, whether there is a difference with characters that, in a long-term campaign with a game that does facilitate that stuff. Folks who have more experience with 3.5 or Pathfinder or 4th edition for that matter, or Pathfinder 2, I guess, would be able to speak more to that. But I think some of those games, because of the inherent assumption about how you're gaining XP and how many, there's the math from 3rd edition going forward that drives a lot of those games, where the expectation is if you're running it as written, you're going to be gaining, after X amount of combat encounters or X amount of XP rewards, you're then going to hit a new level, and I think that it would engender a very different type of experience. I mean, obviously, I guess, because you're going to get, your numbers get bigger, you get to do new things, but in any event, it's just something that has been, that I think is interesting about the ongoing campaigns. Those are excellent games, and why I think if I wasn't like intentionally trying to set out to run a long-term mega campaign or something like that, 2nd edition would be a very, very, very attractive pick. And that's not to say that the system or the mechanics or whatnot are facile or overly simplistic. I think that there's still plenty of great decisions that players make. It's just that it's more in the execution of their characters than it is in the planning of their characters, if that makes sense. In terms of the one-shots that I've run, one of the things that has been an interesting observation that I was talking to Jeff from the channel on Friday night, and one of the interesting observations he made was the challenge that we've had with story games. So games like City of Mist, Cult Divinity Lost, or I think that's all the story games we've run on the channel this year at least. But the thing that's been interesting about those is because they require a different, a different way of thinking about the mechanics and how you progress through the story. Sometimes, particularly if players don't have a great deal of experience with that, it can be a rocky transition because players are not quite sure how do I interact with the rules to make the story change, and have that feel like an intuitive way. Or an intuitive way of affecting the story. I know if I'm playing D&D that if I attack an orc or something like that and I make an attack roll and I hit it, then I'm going to be changing the story by, injuring or killing that orc. Similarly, in a more modern version, if you're making a diplomacy check, you might be affecting the mood and whatnot of the other party, and then you can, when that change circumstance occurs, you can then respond accordingly and then continue on with your decisions of how to affect the story. In In the story games, the thing I've recently realized is that there isn't an assumed outcome from it. It's not like, today we were playing Cult Divinity Lost, and one of the ways that it dawned on me that those games differ from, say, Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, other horror games that I really like, it's not a matter of like, I'm going to make X roll and then get my, clue from this particular source. What the game does is by making a move, which is the way that your characters affect the fiction, you will be determining whether there's information to be had, and then you can then determine if you get it. So it's a different way of moving, and I hope I'm doing a good enough job of explaining the difference. But it's definitely a different way of thinking about and affecting the fiction that's going along. It's neither better nor worse, but I have thoroughly enjoyed Cult in particular. We had a good session with City of Mist, but I found City of Mist to be a little more nebulous. It was less concrete in terms of me being able to, as a DM, adjudicate what was sort of happening as a result of the moves, and also articulating to the players what the moves actually mean. In Cult, they're just, there's a couple ones in Cult that just, to me, feel more intuitive, like, engage in combat, or, do something risky. I can't remember what it's called. Something risky, or, avoiding harm, or facing, when you're having a stress moment or stress interaction, whether because of fear or danger or whatever. And I just... yeah, I found that the cult game has been a lot easier. And the interesting thing with those games too is those games seem to be because it's an experience, I guess, that I can relate to the first couple of times we tried playing Star Wars. The Star Wars RPGs from Fantasy Flight. One of the things that has been so interesting with those games, or was interesting about those games, is that every dice roll had like a matrix of different possible outcomes. It wasn't just a matter of success and failure. There was also a matter of like good stuff happening or bad stuff happening that was independent of success or failure. So you could have things like, you could roll, make a check. The example they use from the rule books is like if you're trying to break into a slice or use electronics or whatnot to break into a hangar bay. If you get a success but you get threat, what that means is probably that you did succeed, you got it open, but you also set an alarm off. Or if you failed and then got an advantage, you might do something like you figured out that, shit, we couldn't get this thing to hack open this way. But the advantage I got from it is that, I can see that there's a card reader on here. So all I need to do is get a hold of a card. If I can find a card, that'll open this thing, and I don't have to worry about hacking it. That's not an example from the book. That's just me talking out of my ass. So take that for what it's worth if you think that's a shitty example. But the thing that I find interesting about those, in particular about Cult, is that it feels more immersive than what I felt City Mist was. I'm thinking less, and also, my experience with other more story game oriented things like Blades in the Dark or Band of Blades, the level of friction between yourself and the rules and the fiction is going to be obviously a very personal thing. It's going to depend on you subjectively, how much it works for you. For us, I found that Cult has just been a great fluid thing where when you really get into the game and you're bouncing back and forth between scenes and things are happening, it is amazing how fast the time flies with that game. So, all of that was to say that when selecting one-shots, one of the things I've realized is that there is a certain threshold for level of complexity with games, and if the games are overly complex, then the need to pare them down to what is necessary to give the feel for that game without, overwhelming the players with information. An example from this year was our Shadowrun 3rd Edition game, which I actually had a really, really good time at, but we ended up spending almost half of that session offline going through a sample combat to get the players to understand the rules mechanics. And the reason we needed to spend so much time was not because the players were not very intelligent, good players, seasoned with a bunch of different rules. It's just that there was a lot to learn and to sort of internalize with that game. Once they did, they played like all-stars, but it did require that much time. So would that I had to do it again, I would definitely make sure that there was stuff ahead of time for them. And it means that certain games, like particular for some of the story games, if I'm running a story game for players that are not familiar with that kind of approach, I might find ways to make it easier for them to clearly step through the mechanics in order to be making good and I don't mean good, but like meaningful decisions with respect to what their characters are doing. So the other thing I realize is that, because of the way we run games on the channel, the use of Roll20 is critical for, well, not critical, it's not fully determinative, but it really will have an influence on whether I'm going to run a game on the channel or not. There are two games that I've sort of been kicking at for the last 3 months or so that I really would like to get to the channel, but because of the complexity of the games and because of the lack of a Roll20 sheet, I have no plans to get them to the table soon, because it's going to be a colossal pain in the ass to try and fudge the dice mechanics and play through the dice mechanics without that. That's not to say that I won't run a game that does not have a Roll20 character sheet, because I'm going to talk about Acton Cthulhu 2D20 in a little bit, and that game was fantastic, and it was relatively easy to run without a Roll20 sheet. But I did use Roll20 to run it. I used character sheets loaded as images in there, and then had other ways of sort of streamlining things. We had some rules loaded in as handouts. But that game is also a much lighter on its feet set of rules than, say, the Trinity games or Lex Occultum, 2 games that I mentioned in my last update. I've gotten no further with either of those games because there's no Roll20 sheet yet, and until there is, I just don't see. I don't see it as being a reasonable way of running a one-shot for players. At least not something I'm going to stream. So that is that. I mentioned I was going to talk about the charity efforts as well too. So the regular viewers will know that the charity that benefits from our charity initiative is SOS Children's Villages International, which is a really, really great organization, active in over 130 countries, benefiting over 80,000 orphan and abandoned children. And to date this year, we've raised over $4,000 and that's only up until October, when they changed their donor platform once again. And I had initially intended to try and get that set back up again so we could get our final raffle off for the year, and then I just got, to be honest, too busy at the day job. So between trying to manage day job and then manage real life and then keep running games on the channel, I just did not have time to get that sorted out. And the more I thought about it recently too, the more I want to figure out what we want to do for the charity next year, before I get that up and running again. We definitely will be setting up a way of making donations to SOS Children's Villages International, because I think they do fantastic work. It's a very valuable service they provide. If you check them on the index for the ratio of donations that reach the intended recipients, it's extraordinarily high. And yeah, they score high on bureaucracy indexes or indices. So it's a great organization, and I really appreciate to be able to run do the charity raffles as well, because I'd like to be able to say thank you to the players the donors who donate to that. But the way we were doing things this year was every 2 months we'd run a charity session, and one of the effects of that was that, and the players have not said this, so I do not want to speak for them out of turn here, but I feel like every 2 months comes up a lot faster than you think. And a Saturday afternoon to spend 4 hours doing that, no one has said that they felt it was a chore, but preparing at least a couple of those sessions was a chore on my part. And because it was benefiting charity, I don't mind. It's not. I don't mind putting an effort to benefit the charity that we support here. But there wasn't really, apart from the maybe first or second one, there wasn't a direct connection between what the donation and the outcome in the session. It was really just people got to vote for what game they wanted to see in the next thing, and like that, I think that still was a clever idea, but having a thematic game every couple of months. But the outcome was that we'd have the vote come in eventually, and sometimes it required a little bit of nagging, and then we had to, for the first couple of sessions, we did set up ways of spending the money that you donated to outfit the heroes, and that works for AD&D, and it worked really well for Savage Rifts. It doesn't really work for a lot of the other games that we ran, so it was an imperfect fit for some of the other games that we ended up running, or ended up winning the vote. So that wasn't great. And then I think that there must be a better way to connect the donations directly to the outcome on the channel, and I need to figure out what that is. In past, we've had games available, so people would make donations, and then we would set aside I'd run a charity session for them, and that worked pretty well too. But that also ended up being predominantly the roster players who were doing that, and that is and that wasn't. That was fine, because I love running games for those folks, but it's also felt too much like putting the onus on them to pay to be part of the charity part or the channel or whatever, and I just wasn't really comfortable with that. So I don't know what what we're going to do next year. I'm going to spend part of the holidays thinking about that and rejigging it. But the reason we haven't got that back up online is in part because it has been such a pain in the ass to change this each time, because then I needed to keep track of who made donations before, and sometimes it is hard to do that when they have changed providers. So like for the 2 times ago, I ended up having to contact them to send me the info for the donors so I could actually figure out who had donated, so I could send the, get the correct names in the raffle. And I really don't want to do that again, because it's that kind of bureaucratic stuff is just a colossal pain in the ass. And when people are donating their real money to the channel, whether it's to try and win stuff or whether it's just because people are being generous or not, I still want to make sure that I am honoring those obligations and honoring those donations with the things that I said that you would get from that, with a possible receipt of prizes. So we will see. We'll see what is going to come in the new year. I'm not sure what what that's going to look like right now, but I do have almost 2 full weeks of time to think about that, and I will. I'm happy to take suggestions as well, too. If anyone has any ideas or suggestions for that, please feel free to leave a comment down here, or to contact me on the Discord server or whatever. So I'm happy to contemplate that stuff. So that's where we've been. I mean, I think overall. One last thing I was going to mention too is for future planning for 2022 is to be cognizant of the impact of the summer. Our Friday sessions became a bit of a struggle to figure out what to do, and I was often scrambling, or I felt I was often scrambling on Fridays to figure out what we were playing throughout the summer, because in the summertime people are going out, they're doing other things, they're golfing, they're visiting, going on vacation. Even in COVID times, if you're not going on vacation, sometimes you want to go camping with your in your safety bubble, or you want to go, I don't know, you just want to spend time outside, and that's something I need to be mindful of for the coming summer, is figure out. I don't want to put games on pause, and to be honest, most of the ongoing games, like the Wednesday night games and the Sunday, the Wednesday night games, the weeknight games are never affected by that. So Night Below will not be affected. It's really just the Friday, Saturday, Sunday kind of games that are affected. And what I'm hoping to do over the break is make sure that I've got planning done for every single one of those campaigns, rather than planning for, I'm going to do this too, but rather than planning for other games, I'm going to plan ahead for the existing games to sort of idiot-proof them for when we are down players, so we can keep playing the same games, because especially for the ongoing games, I really do enjoy that. Getting that time under your belt. And in all those games too, the characters are at such a level right now where it's not, I'm not worried about them dying right away. So yeah. So with that in mind, that's sort of the pacing of games, and sort of the long ongoing games, the one shots, the impact of summer, and the status of charity. Let's talk about some games now. And first thing I thought I would talk about is the D&D games. We are, if you look at the games that we run on the channel the most, we are primarily a Dungeons & Dragons channel. We run a shit ton of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, and then recently we have also been branching into 3.5 and particularly 5th edition. So one of the things I'd say, I guess, and I've made this clear on the channel before and whatnot, as much as I do really, really love our 2nd edition games, as I said in the overview for that one, it's a matter of finding the right tool for the right job. And sometimes on other versions of D&D, like 3.5 or 5th edition or Pathfinder 2, I find that they are better fits for what I intend to do with the story or the campaign or whatever else. So let's talk about those games. Wow. Pathfinder 2, it's such a heavy rule book. So I talked about AD&D 2nd edition. AD&D 2nd edition, I think, is just a fucking awesome game. Really, really well done. Eminently hackable and moddable and whatnot. And you can really do a lot to make this game fit to be what you want at the table in terms of sensibilities and power level and whatever, especially if you're embracing options beyond the player's rulebook. One of the things that I find, I think, has been critical with our success with this campaign or this game has been the use of Astonishing Fortune. Regular viewers will know what I'm talking about when I mention Astonishing Fortune, but if you're new or if you haven't been watching the AD&D games, the Astonishing Fortune narrative metacurrency allows you to re-roll a dice roll, or it allows you to not die. Full stop. So the astonishing amount of Astonishing Fortune that everyone starts with at the start of the session is the number of players that are there. If players join later, then people get another Astonishing Fortune. And then there are rare times where I will grant a point of Astonishing Fortune for some things. Usually if someone is role-playing their character to the character's detriment, I will award a point of Astonishing Fortune, because I fully appreciate and support that kind of stuff when people are knowing their characters, and I don't mean like playing a character in a disruptive way of being a dick or whatnot, but like when you play your character in a mechanically suboptimal way for a circumstance, that's great, and that definitely deserves a reward for it. And the the things I enjoy the most, in addition to the things I mentioned before, I think some of the things I really love about this game are how easy it is to like improvise stuff, how easy it is to be like, oh, you're encountering this. It takes me almost no time to flip through a book and, once we roll a random encounter and figure out what it is they're facing and then run it directly from the book. I don't find that I need to prep a lot of stuff ahead of time. What I have been doing is I've been stealing ideas from other editions in terms of character levels for monsters. So, like when we had a massive fight with a Gnoll army in about the second quarter of the campaign, and I made use of a lot of the ideas from a Pathfinder book from the Monster Codex. And what that has is a bunch of written by Pathfinder rules, but it's a bunch of monsters that have been given class levels, and it gives you challenge ratings from 1 up to 20, so things that are appropriate for facing first level party all the way up to 20th level party. And there's great ideas in there. And what that means is, I guess what that allows me to do is to what a lot of other editions do, where you keep those signature monsters kind of a competitive part or a challenging part of the game, going on. And also, I think, in terms of an old school kind of, agnostic world, one that doesn't care about the success or failure of the heroes, it also means that the heroes are not the only ones getting more powerful or have the potential to get more powerful in the setting. Your 8th level cleric of Corellon could potentially run into an 8th or 9th or 10th or whatever the hell level, priest or shaman of Yanahu. And then they'll be facing them. And I've enjoyed that. Requires more prep ahead of time because that shit isn't pre-made for AD&D. But almost anything else, And I'm really appreciating something about the game that I think is it's a complaint, or at least it was identified as a problem in later editions and tried to sort of to change and harmonize things. But that's the weird situational rules for certain monsters, like the way you get out of a grapple is not the same for every monster. Like the way you get out of a purple worm's stomach and the way you get out of a roper's tentacles, or the way you get out of a embrace from a, what do they call them, a cloaker, it's all different. Like they're all different rules in that, and I actually like that because I think it gives each thing a unique feel to it, and it doesn't mean that you can just optimize in one specific way and know that you get out of a grapple each time, I guess. I also really love the variety of interesting tactical, encounters. Like AD&D 2nd edition, if you one house thing I do, and people may have noticed this, is generally I give max hit points for everything the guys fight. And the reason being is because they're going to blow. I don't want to sit and roll each time. I've realized that just wastes time. And if I just give everything max hit points, that lasts for a satisfying encounter. It offsets the fact that the players get, Players have access to Astonishing Fortune. They've often got quite good stats, and the characters, because of the randomness of some of the early magic item rolls, they've got some phenomenal magic items, like well outpacing their level. They could regularly rely on the assistance of an Earth Elemental for a long time. They've got a +4 shield and some other like magical armor and shit in the thing. Weapons that do upwards of +4 bonuses against certain creatures. So because of that, I don't mind having to give them the appropriate challenge, especially for some of the bigger creatures. I just max out the hit dice. But it definitely, and I guess one of the reason I mentioned that is because it allows us to have some of these more fun and tactical encounters, and the players, I think, are kept on their toes with things, like they can't necessarily expect how certain things will play out. I also find that for those campaigns, this gives us, I think, the level of mechanical complexity for everything that we need to do involving the physical domain, that we would encounter in the game. The downside to that means that the rules for non-physical things, particularly like research or social interaction, it's non-existent in the game. I know that there is a random encounter reaction modifier that's there, but that's the extent of the guidance. Once you make that roll and you've applied your charisma modifier, it's not really other stuff that happens. There are some sort of charisma proficiencies in the game as well, particularly if you add in skills and talents, the stuff that was from late in the life cycle. But it's just not part of the game, at least not part. And by part of the game, I mean the mechanical part of the game. The rest of it just occurs in role playing. And I'm of two minds of that. For one, I do really like having, gamified aspects to different parts of your, non-combat parts of your game. If you're taking a 5th edition approach, the idea of the 3 pillars, right, or 3 tiers, exploration, role-playing, and combat, 2 of those tiers are modeled using this game, or this with the adventure, the Wilderness Survival Guide. It doesn't have for the social interaction stuff, for the role-playing component. There's no rules for it. There's not like a game there in the sense of the game rules. You are not making tactical, mechanical decisions that are going to have an outcome. Now, to save some commenters, spells like Dominate or Charm Person or whatnot, that can obviously have an effect on those things. But that, I think, if you're resorting to that stuff, it is because you are avoiding combat. So it is still, I think, a kind of violence that you're inflicting in the sense of you are doing something that the other person would not want you to do, and you are using a game mechanic to do that. That said, I don't think I'd add anything into here for that, because for a couple of reasons. For one, the game doesn't have rules for that, so if I'm not having players being able to make decisions, meaningful decisions on how they build their characters with respect to that stuff, and they're not getting class abilities from that, well then, to make a whole game mechanic based around the charisma stat or like charisma related proficiencies, I just don't think it's worth it. We do well enough with the role playing, with setting this tone for the encounter, as it were, with the random reaction thing. It doesn't mean that I don't still love those rules. I think that they don't have a place in these things. And if for no other reason, also, there's no XP that you get from that stuff. There's not a way of specifying this is how much XP you get from engaging in those kind of activities. So if you're engaging with the rules mechanics, but there's no reward for that in a tangible advancement kind of way, again, you could add it. I just don't see why. And if you do want that, there's other games that already have that probably do it better. So, awesome game. Game we were playing for quite a while there, and then just sort of came off the rails, was the 3rd edition. And anyone who's watched any of our Barrel Maze games has heard me say this, but I don't think that for us, again, subjectively, this is the best fit for getting the experience that we want out of Barrel Maze, where we want a complete level of simulationist kind of nitty-gritty with it, while also giving the players a bit of a fighting chance in the sense of how they build their characters. Now, we only got our characters up to about like 3rd or 4th level, so like maybe at higher levels, characters will get, it will become a very different type of game, and it'll get more into that like super heroic cinematic stuff you get in, or at least people think that you get in 5th edition, or not think, but people say you get in 5th edition. But I mean, it's great. Like it is in the same way that I really love the freedom to kind of like adjudicate stuff on the fly with 2nd edition. I love having that codified set of rules that the players can learn and then take advantage of to see their successes and their victories. Seeing a player in our game go along and advance towards getting the cleave feat, right? Because he ended up being the tank in a lot of cases, and when he would have these enemies go in, being able to first having to like whittle them down while they're chopping away at him. Then when he hits that level where he takes cleave and being able to just carve through a bunch of them, super badass. And it was a way that he was recognizing what was happening in the fiction and building off of that. Similarly, one of the other heroes learned, like, Jesus, like navigating to the barrow maze is being a colossal pain in the ass. I'm going to take a level in Ranger, so I can start taking points in survival and make sure we're getting there, without getting lost, running into random encounters, or the other sort of problems. I also kind of like that this it takes a step towards fairness that would continue on with the other 2 editions. As much as I run as a player put it recently, an unforgiving type of game, like death is a reality and a real threat in all of my games. I always root for the heroes. And the neat thing with this game is because the designers wanted to have, I guess, more fairness to it, there is that some of those things that I sometimes reluctantly deploy against heroes, or I will change, like energy drain, for instance. Energy drain is brutal in old school editions, and I don't think it's fun. I think it's something that people live with and that they accept because it's part of the game, and it is a serious consequence, but I don't think it's fun. And the way that 3rd edition or 3.5 blunts that, instead of just making it like, well, let's just make it ability drain instead, which is what was suggested in AD&D. I think that that step towards fairness, more steps towards potential failure, it makes it. For me, I feel, I guess, less guilty if players die or characters die or whatnot. But also, I think that it makes for a more fair experience with the players when some of those particularly debilitating effects that would have just like been instant death in earlier editions are deployed against them. Hold person is what I'm particularly thinking of, because hold person is fucking brutal in older editions of the game. 30.5 also still has definitely its edge to it, and one of the things that's been interesting with revisiting this as opposed to Pathfinder, this is way closer to 2nd edition than I remember. The hit dice for certain casters are still way lower than what they are in Pathfinder, and what will become the standard for like 4th edition and 5th edition. And they're also healing is brutal, brutally slow. I love it. The characters also are more streamlined. Like I did not realize, or at least I didn't remember, how much extra stuff each class got when the changes were made from D&D 3.5 to Pathfinder, because most of my time has been with Pathfinder the last little while, and Pathfinder 2nd, like for the last 8 years or however long Pathfinder 1's been around. We don't have an ongoing game right now with D&D 3.5, but it has been some of, I think, my favorite gameplay this year, and it's been a great reminder of why it's such a well thought of edition. And I don't mean in general, because there's some, I was one of the people who, by the time that the life cycle of the game came to an end, I was ready for something new. I found the bloat of feats and whatnot, but the way we've been playing has been with just the core book and with one edition, with the Heroes of Horror game added on, and that has been awesome. It was really fun. The core game that you start with 3.5, I think, is a terrific expression of D&D and gives a really gritty, and very close to second edition kind of experience, but with more, I think, more parts of the game. For one thing, expanded on as far as like set rules are, skills are incorporated into the game much more inherently in this than they are in second edition, and that step towards fairness, I think, makes for some players a better experience, particularly when the things that would have been just absolutely and utterly debilitating in previous editions are used against them. So it's great stuff, and I love that there is a unified set of rules. One of my favorite purchases for this edition was, where'd it go? I don't know where I put it, but it's my rules compendium. The rules compendium for 3.5 is absolutely fantastic game aid, and I found myself reading it after every session, going back and refreshing my memory on stuff. So really enjoyed that. As well, 5th edition. 5th edition, we have been running 2 different campaigns on it, and I really feel like I have, I've got my footing with 5th edition in terms of scaling difficulty of encounters and figuring out how to make how to advance characters, like how to sort of time and pace advancement, and how to write for it. And I, both our Warcraft game and our Ravnica game have been very, very interesting games, not only in terms of having some really, really cool set-piece combats. I'm relying on the similarities between 5th edition and 4th edition to draw on some of my experience with 4th edition to design these more, boss encounters, or like, moving encounters and goal-oriented encounters. The Runehammer on his channel, Hank Ferndale, whatever Hank's last name is, he's got some great advice from several years back now on designing set piece or goal oriented encounters, and I'm enjoying doing that again with this game. I also appreciate how light on its feet it is. The game is very, very easy to run at the table, even with spellcasting enemies, like having to look up, if I have to look up spells, which I often do because I'm a lousy prepper in that sense of having all that stuff ready. But if I have to look up spells or I have to look up other effects, they're usually very easy to figure out. I really do appreciate how fair everything is, because it means that, like in 4th edition, I can confidently throw stuff at players with the expectation that it's not going to be, well, this one thing they've done has now taken the players out of the fight. The fact that, like, a lot of things you get to save each round against, I love that. I love that about 4th edition. It made combat feel a lot more fun. There's that combat versus sport versus combat as war, and like there's advantages to having both of those approaches depending on the type of experience you want at the table. But for a good, fun, wacko encounter with bizarre monsters, with weird abilities, and player characters who can toss spells and shit like that, like you do in D&D, 5th edition offers a really, really solid experience like that. I also like how easy it is to make shit up for 5th edition, because the bounded accuracy sets the range of things fairly low. Magic items tend to be more thematic than they are just mechanical bonuses, and that's great because it makes for those thematic items feel more meaningful and useful than I think that they do in some other versions, and I think that it forces you, because like the bonuses for weapons say, the average weapon you're going to get is between +1, +3. You have to be thinking of other ways to make those magic items interesting. And that's great, because that's something that D&D struggled with from the get-go, right? Of like, how many +1 swords are there kicking around in this world if I keep finding these damn things? And they're all indistinguishable from each other. You know, like I use the comprehensive equipment manual to add little flavor and minor effects to each weapon that we introduce into the game. And with 5e, it's super easy to do that as well. Or to even give minor, non-directly, like mechanical bonuses to masterwork weapons and things like that. Yeah, it's just for running cinematic kind of magic or cinematic fantasy, it's a fantastic game. I also think that players really like their characters in this. The campaigns I've been running lately have had characters at 3rd level and characters at 5th level, respectively. And the characters have a lot to do without it becoming an overwhelming thing. They're not burdened with having to keep track of situational modifiers and stuff. Really, the stuff that focuses their attention is the cool shit they get to do in any encounter, whether it's a combat encounter or a non-combat encounter. And that is quite clever, I think. I think it means that it reduces, and I'm not saying anything revolutionary. This game's so old now that there's plenty of people who have said this better and you know, sooner than I have, but in comparison to the other versions of D&D, it means that the players are a little more focused on what they do as opposed to what the bonus they get. The lack of mathematical bonuses in the game is both an advantage because it gives you, you know, you can focus on the things that you can do that are cooler as opposed to just the bonuses you get that are situational. But it also means that there's a lack of granularity. So there is not quite as many, for players who really like making those like Twist and Dobbs and Niles thing, it's not there. And none of that is good or bad. It just means that it makes for a specific type of experience at the table, and I'm really enjoying that for the games we've been running. You know, it's a very easy game. Not only easy, it's a very exciting game to write for because there's more to monsters and there's more to the spells and whatnot in this than there are in AD&D 2nd edition. I'm less inclined to use, say, spell-based monsters in AD&D 2nd edition, partly because the players know to just disrupt them. If they hit them beforehand, then they'll lose their spells, so it's just not really not worth the effort or time to put that in for it. The other thing is the spells are super deadly, you know, and especially for some of the more higher level spells, they can become incredibly punishing, and they're not a lot of fun, you know, like someone who regularly deploys Hold Person against the players, if they get tagged by that, in AD&D 2nd, I believe the duration is like 10 minutes per level. So it's a turn per level. So I mean, your character's effectively out of the fight unless someone's got Dispel Magic. And that's not the case in here. It becomes a short-term thing. So I get to take advantage of more spells and other like caster-type effects as opposed to just like monster innate abilities. And I like that. I enjoy that quite a bit. It's a great game. I think it's a really... really fun, and I've been enjoying revisiting that. Now, one game that we almost went a full year without playing at the table, but we will be returning to on Wednesday, is Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Now, in retrospect, in the last little bit, the reason that I stopped running Pathfinder 2nd on the channel was in part because of the characters were getting to a certain level where I wasn't comfortable with the math any longer. Because, you know, everything in Pathfinder 2 is sort of, it's a parody of, you know, at your level. So, but those numbers all escalate. So, you know, when you get into the like realms of 5th level to 8th level, what you're seeing is the characters doing the numbers for the damage they do, the numbers they need to hit for their target numbers, the saves they need to make, they all go up. And they're still about, like, they're all at parity, so they're all at roughly the same level, but they're all larger, so it just becomes, I don't know, like when you roll, if you're 6th level or 7th level and you roll a 22 to hit, is that good? If it is, how good is it? You know, and like it's easy to figure out, you can have the numbers in front of you, it doesn't have that intuitive, you know, feel from years of playing D&D where you're just like, fuck yeah, I got a whatever. And like, you can look at your raw number you rolled on your D20 and kind of dictate from there. But, you know, I don't know, like when you're like, oh, you only rolled a 24, sorry you missed, you need a 28 on that. And, you know, I'm 7th level, I rolled a, you know, a 30 on my wisdom check or my diplomacy roll. Like, how good is that? And you're like, no, it's actually, it's middling. You know, it's not a critical success. It's good. A 30 feels like it should be bigger, but that's such a silly way to look at it, at the game. But it is something that was bugging me. And then also we had one session that I think was very frustrating for a lot of the players, or for a few of the players at least. And then we sort of like that game lost momentum, and then we went on to AD&D second. So I've gone back to Pathfinder a couple of times last year. And that was a really, really fun session, but I didn't carry on with or go back to Pathfinder afterwards. Most recently, I mentioned in our last update that Guns and Gear and Secrets of Magic were released, and both of those are amazing, like great books. In particular, Guns and Gear, I would have thought that I would have, if you asked me before, that Secrets of Magic would be the one that I would enjoy more, because I really do love the Magus class, and I really do enjoy the PF2 version of the Magus. But Guns and Gear is, oh my goodness, the Inventor class is super interesting, like very unlike anything else that I've seen. It's honestly closer to something that I saw in Pathfinder, or in Starfinder, in the Starfinder game. The whatever the like mechanic, it may actually be called the mechanic, whatever the class is, that's the mechanic kind of thing in that. The Inventor is very much like the Pathfinder 2 version of that, where you're crafting like a set of armor or a weapon or a companion, like a robot or whatnot. And the way that it differs from the Artificer from D&D is that this is not a magical class. It's not something that's like a kind of wizard. It is a strictly inventor. Their abilities are mundane, but they're super interesting and super cool. And in a lot of cases, they are, I think, they require more inventive, if I might say, uses of them to be particularly effective. I think they can be really effective when you're making use of them. It's kind of like if you think of characters in a, say, first-person shooter. I'm playing a lot of Overwatch this weekend, so that's sort of first in my mind. And like, there are characters in Overwatch that anyone can pick up and play. You know, Soldier 76 is a guy with a gun and a grenade launcher and a healing thing. So like, anybody who's played a first-person shooter knows how to play that character. But if you want to play Hammond is a hamster in a ball that has a slam ability and a limited force field and can zip along a little faster sometimes, and also has some moderately effective guns. That is a character that is less intuitive to figure out how you are effective with that. Winston is a similar character. A big monkey that dive bombs in and creates a force field and has a lightning gun with a very limited range. Those characters are not, it's not as intuitive coming from one thing to this to figure out how to be effective. Similarly, the Inventor, I think, is like that. It's like you can really make a very interesting and useful, like, as it were, character who's meaningfully contributing to the adventures. But it does require, it's not as obvious, I think, as what, say, like a cleric would be, or like a fighter. And so those things have got me interested in thinking about Pathfinder 2 again. I went back onto my, I've got the subscription to the Lone Wolf, Hero Lab. So I've been building characters again too, and I'm interested to see getting it back to the table, whether my interest is going to be, driven on by this. The reason I'm excited about it again now is the same reasons I enjoyed it before. I think that the game, character creation is, or can be, pretty complex. There's a lot of decisions you're making, so you're having to make a bunch of decisions to sort of build your character. But the thing is that they're not, and you can't get away from that. It's not as light on its feet as what, like, 5th edition is. But it's kind of idiot-proof. Like, it tells you the stats you should have that are good for your class. And as long as you're not sub-optimizing yourself there, your character's going to be pretty good at the things you're supposed to be good at. You're going to be able to cast spells. You're going to be able to, fight if you're a fighter. Even if you do have dogshit stats, you still can often, still be effective at your class. It just means you're not quite as effective. You're just off by a couple of points. But I think that the game, to its fairness, does offer a lot of advice on how, like, what are the optimal sort of ways of building your character. But there's an enormous amount of flexibility for building the characters, which I like. And at the table, I think there's a lot of interesting decisions that are made by virtue of the action economy. Regular viewers will know, or if you're familiar with PF2, forgive me for repeating this, but Pathfinder 2, instead of having like a standard, a minor, and a move, or a standard, a bonus action, and then you also get to move like 5th edition does, what you get is 3 actions, and those actions can be spent to do a bunch of different things. Some things are one action items, like, you know, not readying a weapon. There's like, I don't know, interacting with an object, seeking, like trying to like look around in a room and make a skill check to try and spot something, find someone who's hidden, or attacking. Each attack is one action, and then for every additional attack, absent other modifiers that you take in the round, it's -5, -10 to your attacks. And moving, you can move an amount equal to your action. And that sounds pretty facile, and it sounds like, you know, well, I would only make, you know, I'd only make a couple of decisions on this, but you know, or my decisions might be obvious each round. But the thing I like about that is that, you know, especially if you've got a class that has spellcasting or a hybrid spellcaster, you know, a spellcaster and a martial class, somebody who does some fighting and other stuff, it's always going to be, every one of those actions has an interesting decision, you know, behind it. And you know, something we've been saying lately on the channel, you know, there's a reason they put 20s on dice, and that's for even your 3rd attack. You know, if you get a -10 to your attack, the chances of hitting are probably not great, but who knows? You know, so even if you get a chance to attack 3 times in a round, that's badass, and that starts right at the 1st level. And I've mentioned this before as well, but like, I think Pathfinder 2 has one of the most, and this is related to the action economy, it has a way of investing you in the game, or in the scene, when you're making those decisions, right? Like, especially if you're a sword and board, fighters feel more like they're making decisions and meaningful decisions in that game than almost any other game I've played, because you have to make that decision. Like, okay, I'm going to raise my shield, and that's one of my actions. I now have the option, if I'm a fighter, or if I have someone else who's got a shield block, I can reaction to block that and reduce some damage from what I take. But it's another one of those things like, well, do I do that, or do I try and like get that extra strike in, or do I try and maneuver myself, or do I cast a spell if I'm a spellcaster who also wields a shield, like you know, some martial clerics can do? That's just one example of the ways that I think that the game has done such a good job of streamlining the mechanics, streamlining the, like, boiling down the actual play at the table into a manageable amount. And yeah, I mean, I remember some of the great sessions we've had in the past, the critical effect system as well, when you're fighting lower level creatures, like in particular, or when you're fighting big adversaries who get crits on you. Critical hit is when you roll 10 higher than what your target number is, which means that if you're fighting higher level monsters and they've got a bigger chance to hit you, then they're going to crit more often, and they already hit harder, so boy, oh boy, look out. Or conversely, when your character is fighting lower level characters, it just, without having to institute a minion mechanic or anything like that, like, it just does a really good job of capturing the feel of that Stormtrooper effect of, like, your badass heroes carving your way through to the minions, but then when you face the big bad, it's going to feel like a more meaningful encounter, because it'll have more hit points, it'll be harder to hit, it'll hit harder, it'll require that teamwork. Yeah, and I mean, the downside I think that I had with Pathfinder previously was the figuring out how to manage advancement, which I think I've got a handle on right now, and figuring out what how you're designing encounters. I have run Pathfinder 2 in a suboptimal way in the past. I don't think it's a wise thing to be rolling just random encounters with PF2, not because of a action economy kind of thing or whatnot. It's because the game system, I think, when you're taking advantage of the mechanics of the system, the consequence of making things that are higher level than you a boss fight, and things that are lower level than you kind of more of a minion fight kind of thing, or a mix of the two, making that like there's one big adversary and a bunch of little shit that's around you that you got to cut your way through. That's what the feel is like with the game. So if you're rolling random encounters, it's like, randomly showing up with a boss encounter, or randomly showing up with a chump, a bunch of chumps. And I feel like for for this type of game, if you have that as the consequence, and I feel it's more pronounced in this. That's obviously the case sometimes if you roll a more powerful adversary in D&D, AD&D second or AD&D first or whatnot, then yeah, it's going to be a more powerful adversary, but it's not the same thing as it is in this. Like the math just works differently. It creates a different feel for that encounter. So randomly having boss encounters, or randomly having like a tense encounter with equal level adversaries, or randomly having a low level thing, it's like taking the pacing of like a good video game, or like the pacing of a movie or a script or something like that, and then just fucking randomly adding pages in and making so the pacing just becomes really weird. And that, I think, is one of the big mistakes that I made with it, is not writing for the intended the intended encounter. That's not to say you can't have random encounters. It's just that random encounters are not supposed to be, in this game, I don't think should be the consequential encounters that, say, like end bosses are, or things like that. Like, you could definitely make a bunch of random encounters, just scale them to be 2 levels less than the player characters. So it's something they're going to get through. It's not going to become a like life or death struggle. Because if you're going to have a life or death struggle in this game, it should be planned. There should be some narrative connection between the tempo and pacing and difficulty of that experience with the rest of the of the overall adventure. So with that in mind, again, like, right tool for the right job. I've got an idea. We're going to be playing something through over for this Wednesday, and then it might carry into the new year, just to finish the story. That is a specific story element I want to incorporate into our Night Below game. The guys are for the first time playing different versions of their characters in a different game that is actually canonical. That's part of the actual campaign, so it'll be interesting. And I'm taking advantage of many of the really clever game mechanics that have been added in, like the Game Mastery Guide and several adventures afterwards, that expand on that other part of the gameplay. The exploration, the investigatory, is that a word? Am I making up a word again? Investigatory? I don't know. Anyway, the investigation part of that of a game, and then also incorporate some neat ideas from Star Wars Saga, with the difficulty of or making skill challenges more interesting. Or at least more dynamic. And I think it's going to make for a really good game. We'll see if it doesn't. If I could be wrong, I certainly won't be the first time, but the preparation for that has made me very, very, very excited about Pathfinder 2nd Edition again. I really enjoy this game. I think there's lots of things it does that it does a very, very good job of, but with that also comes the necessary complexity and other decisions you need to make, right? Like, D&D 5th does not require quite as much of that consideration when I'm running that. It's a much lighter. It's also, because it's sort of a fast and loose and wahoo game more so than Pathfinder 2, that I think the experience at the table is a little different as well. And even though there is bounded accuracy in 5th edition, I think that you can more easily feel like cinematic kind of, larger-than-life heroes in a fantasy context than you can in PF2. PF2, you still are sort of, I don't know, I feel like even though you are playing superheroes, well, not superheroes, like fantasy heroes with phenomenal abilities, you still are grounded in a way that is not quite the same as it is in D&D 5th. And again, not a bad thing, just a thing. So that's our D&D component. I'm already an hour and a half into this video that I thought was going to be an hour and a half, so we're in for the long haul, folks. Let's talk about some games that have really knocked my socks off, and we'll do this in a lightning edition. I'm going to take a little sip of water here. Hello to everyone who is in chat as well, too. Thank you so much for joining me on this Sunday night. So first one up was a long time coming. This was a really a white whale for me for a really, really long time, and this is the one I had to remind myself of it because of a game that I'm going to talk about shortly after. That is White Wolf's Adventure. White Wolf's Adventure First Edition is designed to capture kind of the pulp heroes of yore, and less so. I mean, you can play kind of a like Tarzan, or I don't know, like less superhuman. Although Tarzan's pretty superhuman. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is a game that is really great for capturing the pulp feel of the weird fiction pulp heroes. This is not about playing like, El Barak or like a good boxer or something like that. This is about playing the Shadow or Doc Savage or the Rocketeer or those kinds of characters. Does just a great job. I really love the Storyteller 2.0 version or 2.0 system that it uses. It solves many of the problems that I found with in terms of pacing that I found with our Werewolf the Apocalypse game that we ran shortly before this. The characters are fucking awesome. Like we played a one shot that had an Airsats Captain America, a kind of like Airsats Shade, so kind of like a character who could use shadows and whatnot to do different things, and cold related powers. And then we had a kind of a woman from a high tech society from like kind of like the Eternals or whatnot, or the Inhumans from Marvel, both from Marvel. And the game mechanics at the table are great. They've got a narrative metacurrency in it called, I don't even remember. What is it called? Inspiration. And there's a separate one called Willpower. Willpower is for buying like automatic successes, for kind of having direct control over the outcome of your dice rolls, whereas Inspiration can affect the use of your superpowers and whatnot, and affect the possibilities for them. So you can like double your dice pool, or you can affect the scene or whatnot. All great stuff. It was a fantastic game. It is really good. I really can't say enough good things about it. I know there's a second edition coming out with for Storypath, and I'm going to talk about Storypath a little later. But the game was just fantastic. Like if you want a game where you can have an alien lady with a flying saucer, a super soldier, and effectively kind of like a quasi magical dark force wielder who are fighting Nazi dinosaurs, well then that's Nazi vampire dinosaurs. This is your game. It's a terrific thing, and I think it's pretty in PDF. It's pretty cheap as well on Drive-Thru RPG, so you can handily track it down. And even print versions are not like outrageously priced, and it's only one book. So you don't, if you want to have everything for a game, if you're a completist or whatnot, this is a good game for that. The game that made me forget about that, or at least, come on. There we go. Forget about it for a while was Modiphius Entertainment's brand new Acton Cthulhu. If I was asked to pick the best new game that or my favorite, I should say, new game from 2021, pretty sure it's this one. Acton Cthulhu, if you're not familiar, was originally released for... let's see here. Call of Cthulhu, I think 6th or 7th edition, as well as having rules for the Explorer edition of Savage Worlds. Both Savage Worlds and Call of Cthulhu have gone on to more recent editions, but there was a huge game line for it. What this is their effort to take the game, rework certain elements of it, and play up more of the pulp sensibilities and build it around the 2D20 system, the same one that drives Modiphius's, or several of Modiphius's other RPGs like Conan, Adventures in an Age Undreamed Of, Infinity, John Carter, Dishonored, Star Trek Adventures, Dune most recently. So like lots of Homeworld, Fallout, lots of different systems. And the cool thing they do is they keep tweaking it to be appropriate in terms of level of complexity, level of detail for the setting. And this is just dialed to be my perfect level of complexity. I love the 2D20 system in general, and this is just an outstanding implementation of it. And it's one of my favorite sessions we've had this year was our Acton Cthulhu session. The books are gorgeous as well, too. There's tons and tons of great information in here. And it has... it really benefits, I guess, from all the different iterations of the 2D20 system to date. Because they've been tinkering with it in each of the other games as well. And it presents it in just a terrific way where It is razor focused. It is the tightest presentation of the system, and it's a game where you get to run around and punch Nazis who worship Cthulhu. So, like, I don't know what more you want from a game, but that's an awful lot to offer. The variety of character creation of different types of characters you can make are really interesting too, and the actual like gameplay, the mechanics revolve around all aspects of gameplay, but in a very light touch kind of way, which means that you're constantly kind of like touching the fiction, touching the game mechanics, touching the fiction, touching the game mechanics, and seeing how each of them interplay with each other. Maybe the flakiest way of me describing something, but it makes for an extraordinarily engaging type of play, because you're in the moment, either thinking about what's happening in the story, thinking what's happening with the role playing, and thinking of what the dice results are doing to change and shape that outcome. It's fantastic game. I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes from this. And Ingolf, a buddy on the channel as well, has mentioned that I guess at some point they've mentioned they want to expand this particular rule set into other things, and like the idea of having like an Acton Cthulhu for like the Cold War, or Acton Cthulhu for modern kind of adventure stuff would be amazing. I would love to be able to run those things. So until that time, I'm going to be giddily prepping and running more Acton Cthulhu, because I think it's just a freaking awesome game. Other ones I got on my list here. Actually, since we talked about it earlier, another one we had today that was just a great session, Cult Divinity Lost. I love this game. It is a different experience because I don't run a lot of story games myself. It makes for a very different experience from anything else I run on the channel. And also it really, I've been describing the game, or at least I shouldn't say I have, the marketing material for Cult markets it as, or bills it as, a horror game. And it certainly is, and I think that because of that, I've always sort of lumped it in with games like Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green. And I think that if you are looking strictly at what's happening in the gameplay from those games, I think the better way to understand it is those are mystery-solving games that involve horror. And what Cult is, because it's a story game, it is a discovery, or a revelatory, in the sense of like you're playing and finding out what happens, a revelatory horror experience. And again, I'm well into my flaky description territory here, but that's really what the difference is because like you're learning about a story and whatnot, and it's definitely horror phased, but it's not like other investigatory or investigative games, like even like a City of Mist, where like you're trying to get clues and then piece clues together to try and solve a mystery. This feels more like moving through a story, and like stuff is revealed over the course of the story, but it is not in the same way as you troubleshoot and like try and piece together a mystery like you do in Call of Cthulhu or in Delta Green. I'm obviously talking about those in like very, very broad strokes, so I don't want to make it seem as if I am making it seem like those are simplified games, or like they're not as the experience is not as satisfying as what Cult is, or at least they can't be. It's just that it's a very different experience, and I'm hard pressed. Acton Cthulhu is definitely up there too, but just there are few games where it's as not relentless in a bad way, but like just as completely enrapturing, where we're just, we sit down to start the session, and then we sort of set up some guideposts for what's going to happen. Because the way that you start each session is the players tell the other players what sort of things they'd like to see their characters do or explore or reveal over the course of that session, which gives them a really good clue to be like, hey, this is what we should have happen this session. And then you get going, and it's just, it feeds back. It's so engrossing, and even for the DM as well too. I've been jokingly referring to my role as the DM in that as a cult master, but it's just even for the DM, it's incredibly interesting and engaging, because you just don't know how stuff is going to go out, and it really, I feel myself being more acrobatic in my thinking, in my planning with that game than I am in almost anything else we play. And I often not underprepare, but I have my preparations to be very sparse because I prefer to respond in the moment. In my day job, this is very much what is fun about trial work, is you have an idea of what you want to come out and you have a plan, but you need to be mindful that that is going to be slave to what comes out in the other side's evidence, right? And the rulings of the court and whatnot. And in this case, this is very much like the outcome of the dice rolls is what throws wrenches in plans sometimes, or provides beautiful opportunities and for unexpected, coincidences or opportunities to introduce great story stuff. Phenomenal game. I cannot say enough great stuff. It's one of those games that I miss playing in person for a game like Pathfinder 2 because I have so many great handouts for that game. And critical hits are such a regular thing in that because of the 10 or higher. That's also a great experience at the table. So I miss that aspect of playing in person with respect to Pathfinder 2. This I miss because we could sit around comfortable in a living room or on a deck or something like that and play a really engrossing game of this. I'd need to have a little pad there, but DMs don't roll dice whatsoever, and the moves change things so much that even though you're talking about them, it's not it doesn't feel like it slows down things. It really feels like you're clarifying what the turning point for a certain part of the story is going to be, and then you see what the outcome is that is after the move. And again, I find the moves in this are more intuitive for me than some of the other story games. So just love this game. Another one that would just I mentioned this last time. I just want to quickly mention it again. Warhammer Fantasy 2nd Edition still is one of my favorite campaigns I've run this year as well, too. It ended in a very abrupt way, but with an in-fiction explanation for it, and it felt great. Like, all of the campaign up to that point felt really, really good. Like, the character creation is a lot of fun. Character advancement is regular and routine, which I really like. And it's a really interesting setting. I just really, really enjoyed that. I'm looking forward to finding an excuse and finding an opportunity to get this back to the table again in 2022. I just don't know when it's going to be in the schedule, but it is one I think about at least once a week. It's a fantastic game. Last one that I've run that really is in my knock my socks off kind of way is Star Wars Saga Edition. This is the last version that came out from Wizards of the Coast. I mentioned this a bit in the last update as well too. The thing that I just, the more I spend time with this, the more that we play this, the more I appreciate so much that, again, like Pathfinder 2, standing on the shoulders of the games that came before it, and like Acton Cthulhu, 2D20 standing on the shoulders of the games that came before it, this one also benefits from that. Two other versions of D20 Star Wars came out before. At the time, the studio's thinking about making the transition to 4th edition, so they were playing around with some different mechanics. And the cool thing with this one is that it uses its own version of the D20 system. It is not just D&D that is reskinned to be in Star Wars the way that Star Wars Revised was, or the first Star Wars RPG. It is really distinctly its own thing, and the whole line as a whole I feel like it was created with a clear, this is our statement on playing Star Wars with a D20. The source books do, if you take a look at the library as a whole, they just have a comprehensive set of rules and source material for running at that time, any type of campaign you would want, any time era, whatnot. This is pre, Disney purchase, so it doesn't. It deals with the legacy era, not the new trilogy era. But the core mechanics are there enough for you to be able to easily incorporate that stuff, and the degree to which they're actually incorporating stuff from that old canon back into the Disney stuff. The Disney Star Wars stuff, like with Mandalorian, it means that a lot of that stuff that's referenced in those source books is still germane and still usable in this. The core rulebook also gives you, like, this is everything you need to play the game. There are some source books I think are a little more like not necessary, but like really nice to have, like the Starships book and the Adversaries book. Those are really good ones to have as a next one. Galaxy of Intrigue is another good one because it has very comprehensive rules for making interesting skill challenges, but it's not necessary. And it's just a really, really great game. Like, it hits that level almost like a 5th edition kind of. It's a little more complex, I think, than 5th edition, but it's that level of exciting, you know, sort of bounded accuracy type of play. It's just a really, really, really fun implementation of Star Wars. The other, I should say as well, that like West End Star Wars and Fantasy Flight Star Wars, West End Star Wars, I've only played a few times as an adult, and it was fine. Like, not just fine, it was good. It was a good game. Just the dice mechanic thing, it takes me getting some used to. And for some of the tricks you can do with force points, I'm just not familiar enough with them. So it's a game that I would have to play for quite some time before I could really get a feel for it. And Fantasy Flight, I've had some of my favorite gaming memories from early adventures on that, but I've mentioned before, I'm not crazy about how the dice play out at higher levels, and I'm not in comparison to Saga. I definitely prefer the starship and vehicle combat in this over that in Saga, in the Fantasy Flight. But again, both of those are great. You can have fantastic Star Wars adventures using either of those games. Personally, just for me, this is my go-to. Oh, and because a friend and new player, Darren, has pointed out too, the Star Wars 5th edition hack that's on there. Great set of rules. I think you can have, it's free, and it can give you a great Star Wars experience as well too. For me personally, it feels too much like just playing D&D 5th edition with a Star Wars veneer on it. I think that it still does a totally great job of giving a Star Wars experience. I think that for myself, I prefer this Saga because it feels top to bottom, soup to nuts. It's Star Wars. There's no like, oh, but there's D&D in here, So that's it. Last game, this is sort of getting from a transition of not knock my socks off, but I really see potential in it. That is Shadowrun 3rd edition. I went into this in depth in my last overview, so I'm not going to talk about this too much, but it's my preferred edition of Shadowrun, and I think the reasons for it are largely nostalgic, but if you had to push me for an argument, I'd probably say that I think that this edition requires less of players than what 4th, 5th, or 6th do. Players are required to know a lot more about the mechanics and the specific interaction of their gear and whatnot, which is true of this edition to a degree, but I feel like it is less critical in this edition than it is in others. That's not to say that you can't accidentally build a really shitty character in this. You certainly can, but it's just, I don't know. It's probably mostly nostalgia, but I really like it. Like, I think I've had a lot of fun with it, and the last time we played it, I really enjoyed the session, even though we didn't get a chance to finish things, and I could see potential in what could come from it. It's not something that blew my socks off. It's better than I remembered, and it is, and I think that it's something I would like to see more of at the table, and I can see advancement for the characters being quite good in that edition. We also played some Savage Worlds quite a bit on the channel, and Savage Worlds Adventure Edition is a really interesting animal because I really fell hard for it in June. And then I had what I felt was not a bad session in the sense that like people didn't have fun or whatnot. I felt like the outcomes of the session were not what I had intended. And by that I mean like all the player characters died. Everyone died at the end of this one session, and it sort of took the veneer or the shine of the game off for me. This year we have run Pathfinder for Savage Worlds. This is still my pre-print print version. At the time of recording, it's not out in print, but I think it might be in the mail on the way to me. We also played quite a bit of, or a fair amount of Deadlands, which was the new Deadlands. A hell of a lot of fun. And then we ran a couple of sessions of Savage Rifts as well. And Savage Rifts, our first session was brutal. I really was discouraged by it, but then I decided to get back on that horse and figured out what I think I did wrong, because it was honestly, it was my mistake of the way I designed the that first step part of the adventure, and each subsequent session we had with that was just, each one was better. Savage Rifts is pretty. It has, I think, one of my favorite overland travel rules for anyone, like for a post-apocalyptic kind of like scrambling, trying to get gear kind of stuff. There's a journeys mechanic in the Tomorrow Legion Adventurer's Guide, or Tomorrow Legionnaire's Guide, or something like that. I can't remember what it's called specifically, but it has these journeys rules that just make for so much fun, like abstracting things like food and water and ammo and fuel and stuff like that, giving you random encounters in a really interesting way, and beyond just like, let's fight it, kind of way. It's a great, and on top of that, you also play in a post-apocalyptic game with some crazy powerful heroes. So the power fantasy element of any RPGing is completely satisfied by that particular game. Really, really great game. I think that, like Savage Worlds in general, the mistake I have made in past is how I approach combat encounters and how I think that they should be played out. I think you can play, obviously, like any other game. You can play it like a kind of a quasi miniature game, in the sense that, like, you're just designing interesting set piece encounters that don't really involve combat encounters that don't involve a lot of role playing. But the trouble with Savage Worlds is you need to be mindful of the exploding dice and the potential consequence on the players, and the need for the players to have the narrative metacurrency of bennies in order to blunt the impact of that. Otherwise, it can feel remarkably unfair. And that's sort of what I was thinking about the game after we had our last session. I was like, I'm going to shelve it. I'm not going to include it in my, popular games. And then we made characters and played Pathfinder for Savage Worlds this past Friday. And talking to to two players, to Dave and to Jeff, about sort of like their favorite sessions. And it was, for Jeff, every single game he kept mentioning, like, well, there was a session when we did this, and there was a session when we did this, and we played this other one when we played this. And we were like, Jeff, all three of those are Savage Worlds. And it's like, oh, I'm like, I think your favorite game is Savage Worlds, Jeff. And then Dave was mentioning as well, too, how much he enjoyed our gaming marathon. And we talked a little bit more about that. Then we made the characters for it. And Savage Worlds Adventure Edition it's just a fantastic game. And I had forgotten how much fun, like, I guess for one thing, I had in designing stuff for that. It's very light on its feet, super easy to do shit on the fly. You have great rules for designing and gamifying non-combat stuff. But also from the player's perspective, hearing how the players felt about those exploding dice, they loved it. And that's something that, because I don't play often, it's easy to forget that the player experience, even if you feel you're struggling or like having some difficulties as a DM with things, if those are issues you can address and adjust for, when you've got a game that the players love playing, and I don't think I had anyone come away from the gaming marathon saying, I didn't enjoy that, I don't want to play that game anymore. It was great. It's a game that you should really think about running again. So I'm over my holidays, I'm bringing Savage Worlds back with me, and particularly Savage Pathfinder. Whether I get my box set before I go on vacation, I don't know, but fingers crossed. That'd be nice to have that. If not, I don't care. I've got all the PDFs. It's a great game, and it was amazing how fast. We only had like 40 minutes to play on Friday, but like. And we did, part of the most of that time was spent in a little bit of a fight, but the bits that were not, where we're using the dice and sort of the cards in that case to sort of set up the backstory for what had happened, and in particular the way that the game uses your like drawbacks or hindrances to make your character distinct. Savage Worlds has a wonderful way of making your disadvantages a fun excuse for driving story forward. And that is something like disadvantages in other games like, GURPS or older versions of Five Rings or Hero System. They tend to be the things you just sort of have to deal with, right? Like, they're not things that are prompts for story. They're pain in the ass things you took to sometimes shape your character, but it's more, I mean, primarily it's there just to get points. Savage Worlds does, I think, a good job of focusing on the things that make for interesting characters. So it's easy to, for whatever reason, you know, seeing those shortcomings as something you need to bear in mind as you're role-playing and as you're playing your character and potentially have mechanical modifiers, it makes it much easier to articulate who that character is right from the get-go. You know, if your character's got a cautious thing and you're role-playing that up properly, well, then there's a lot about how to play that character and how it's going to interact with other characters that's obvious right from the get-go. And it was interesting because what Dave took for his character, cautious, and Jeff took for his character, curious. So, and to have the idea of the sort of Fafford and Grey Mouser, you know, pair of adventurers and monster hunters, already you see how that dynamic is interesting and fun. You know, of the like, no, wait, you know, kind of thing, as the curiosity guy is going off without planning and how it irritates the planning guy. And it's just one example of a sort of possible interactions, but it's something that makes those characters just an enormous amount of fun. And we had regular viewers of the channel will know our player Steve O, who has been very infrequent in attendance the last little while because he is off traveling the world right now, and it's getting connection from wherever he is quite difficult. But like Steve played up a mad scientist in our Deadlands Noir game like 3 years ago, and maybe more than that, but just it was amazing how much that character came to life right from the get-go. Steve's a great role player anyway, but just that gave him the excuse to really chew the scenery with that kind of stuff, and I find that's the case with Savage Worlds in a lot of cases. So I have happily been reminded how much I enjoyed working in that game, and also, more importantly, how much the players enjoyed that game. And that's something I really need to bear in mind. It's not just like, how did I feel it went? Like, really listen to what the players are saying when they tell you how much they enjoy a game. So I mentioned as well that I was going to talk about the Story Path games, and the Story Path games are the Trinity games, the Scion, and then there's 2 horror games. Well, since our last recording, I got my print copy of They Came From Beyond the Grave, which is a game that is uses the Story Path system to simulate or to try and capture the feel of schlock 70s horror. And I can't wait to run this. We've got a date with some buddies back home. We're not going to be able to meet in person because of the fucking Omicron thing, but you know, we're going to meet up online over the holidays and play a one-shot of this that is from the Jumpstart. It looks like just a shit ton of fun, and the system reminds me. This one also, I feel like Story Path. I mentioned this on the last update, so I won't belabor this, but it reminds me of all the. Like, it's taken the best ideas of some of my favorite game systems in the last, 10 years and incorporated all of those into the 2.0 storyteller system. And it's great. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm having to go back and reread stuff because there is a lot of moving parts in it, but I feel like it's going to play very light on its feet and have some really fun options, in particular some of the cinematic, narrative metacurrency uses for it, but we'll see how that plays out. And a final one I'll mention as like the knock my socks off games here is something that I honestly I would not have thought that I would have included this on the list, but within the last little while, Netflix has released an animated series called Arcane. And if you're not familiar with it, Arcane is a series that is set in the world of Runeterra. It is the setting for, among other video games, the League of Legends role-playing setting. And the League of Legends video game setting has gone through 2 iterations. It had an initial sort of setup for its lore, and then it did an interesting thing where it said, you know what, I think we got it wrong. And they kind of swept it away and then reestablished, took a second pass at establishing a world. And I didn't live through that. I wasn't invested in the property, but the Arcane series is one of my favorite things I've seen in years. It is unbelievably well done on every aspect. Like it's a gorgeous looking animated series that looks unlike anything else I've ever seen. It has wonderful character work. It does a great job of sort of like jumping forward. There's lots of like every character who is acting in it has like it's clear why they're doing it, and there's great tension between like the need and want kind of stuff, and like it just and the setting is incredible. It's it's two cities, Piltover and Zaun, which are across the river from each other. Piltover being sort of a built-up, glittering metropolis of steampunk and magic tech stuff, hex tech they call it, and then there's Zaun, which is a more undercity and lower class kind of working class type thing in a Victorian, Dickensian kind of way that also makes use of chemtech and chemicals to infuse with magic, probably to alter things or like augment living things, and that's just the setting. But it blew me away. Like, it was a fascinating setting. I'd happened to also just get the Guns and Gears book come out for Pathfinder, so I was really in that kind of like that mode where I wanted to read about kind of gun wielding type of like steampunk fantasy kind of stuff, and then the story itself just fucking blew me away, and the visuals. So I went online. I was like, well, this is really fucking cool. Surely someone has taken a pass at a game for this. And what I came across was a game called Rune Arcana. Rune Arcana was designed by a group of Brazilian game designers who used the 5th edition core mechanic to then develop a game that would, like from my understanding, League of Legends has something like 130 or something champions. Like, it's a huge amount of characters in the game with a variety of different abilities. And what they did in Rune Arcana is they took the core of D&D 5th, but then they stripped it all out, took a bunch of great ideas from, not all, I mean, the core is there, but took a bunch of assumptions about it out, like power level and difficulty and like how many different factors work into your character, and then took some what I think are some ideas they probably borrowed from some of the DM's Guild products, like the complete the Talents books that they had out, and then built this game that is just mind-blowing. Like, it's 471 pages long, and then they've also got a supplement that is just has information for converting monsters over, because your characters in this are much more powerful than your bog standard 5th edition character, at least in combat. And the reasons for that is because partly you get access to more things. There's more elements that go into creating your character. So you have your ancestry or your heritage, I think they call it. And your heritage, every single heritage, even humans, has a lot of flexible decisions you get to make in it, which is amazing. Like, the level of customization in this approaches and I think surpasses 5th edition for sure. It might even be in the level of like Pathfinder 1 in terms of like tweaking your class and your ancestry and your whatever, like all, and there's all sorts of different ways to customize the character. You have a past, a heritage, a class, and a where you're from. Every one of those things, where are my hands going, contributes to the character you're building, and often you have decisions to make in, not often, now I think of it, you have decisions to make in every single one of those elements. So every character is going to, oh, and also your rune mark. You get something called a rune mark, which is like a special ability that's sort of modeling the special abilities you get in the game. It does not feel like a like an adaptation of a video game into a role-playing context. It feels like a very complex and interesting role-playing game that is designed to capture a world that has a huge variety of potential heroes. Like the degree of flexibility and the scope of the types of characters that can take the stage in a game playing with Rune Arcana is mind-boggling. Like, if you can, you can have characters who have like cybernetics, the magical hex tech cybernetics, or maybe they've been altered by chemicals, or they've been I don't know, like I can't even do justice to the wide variety. The best thing is it's free. And I think this does as good of a job as what the World of Warcraft hack did to create its own thing, but there's so much more to this. And and if you are running 5th edition games and you're struggling with how to make the combats a little more interesting without or not interesting, but a little more tactical or gamified without necessarily relying on legendary actions, or turning every single boss fight into a boss fight. This has some great rules that you could easily steal for that. But in and of itself, it looks like a fascinating game. Now, the game is written by Portuguese speakers, and they have done their best, given the amount of material in here, to translate this over into English. And it's intelligible, but there are times where the English is a little challenging, because I think that it may have been run through like auto filters or auto translates, but you can figure out what it is. There's nothing I've encountered in here that has made it where like I'm not clear what it is they're trying to say. It just means that sometimes it's a little, it's a little unusual the way that things are phrased. And there's also feats, which are called enhancements, and man, it's a really, really cool game. Like the thing is with this is it is not something that you could easily drop in front of a player and then like, okay, we're going to make a character and let's get going. I feel like doing that is just going to be hours and hours and hours of decision making and like describing the world and whatnot too. This is something that needs to be shown off, I think, first, to show why it's so cool and like the cool variety of things that can be built with it. But one of the ways where this distinctly differs, I think, from 5th edition, for myself, I don't think there's enough complexity or differentiation between characters at 1st or 2nd level in 5th edition to bother playing at those levels ever again. Any campaign I run with 5th edition will almost invariably be starting at 3rd level and then going forward, because that's when you get interesting shit and then you can kind of engage the rest of the game. This makes characters durable enough and with enough interesting things to differ the characters that I would for sure start at 1st level. Just partly to get the players comfortable with how much stuff is going on, how many things they get to decide. And because it's built around 5th edition as a chassis, I think it's also quite idiot-proof. So it's very hard to build a bad character. You just get to pursue incredible, weird ideas with your characters. So, so that's that game. That has been on my nightstand for basically since I found it and got it printed. It's a really, really interesting game, and I think gives me exactly what I would want to play a game like what we saw happen in the Arcane series. So if you are a fan of the Arcane series, or you did enjoy it, or you're a fan of League of Legends and you also are a 5e fan, do a search for Rune Arcana, all one word. It's you may find it's too much and too busy for you. That's totally fine, but you might find a game that you really really enjoy as well. So those are all my knock my socks off games. Let's just talk about some other games that I have either been thinking or talking about getting this year, and I didn't get this year, but are sort of things that I'm thinking about for 2021. One of them is going to be a superhero game. And the two options I sort of think of for that are, Champions and DC Heroes. Now, we have had a lot of fun with Marvel superheroes as well, too. 3 years ago now, I think. 2 or 3 years ago, we played a short little, series of sessions playing Marvel superheroes with a Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Alpha Flight. And it was a lot of fun, but I find, and the game is good. I think it is much better than I remember it being. I think it is very light on its feet, but it doesn't suit ongoing play, I don't think. I think you don't get to make any mechanical decisions about the character, and there's not anything else you're making a decision on about your character that suits that would reward long-term play other than just story. Champions, obviously, you get hero points. You can change your character as you go. DC Heroes is less so. You can spend hero points to change your character or alter your character in that. So, if you're playing an original character, then there's a reason for why that might be interesting. But the because hero points are also a narrative meta currency in that game to allow you to affect dice rolls and affect the situation. The thing that I find it most interesting about that is the role of, for one thing, I think it's a good game. I also think that it does a good job of giving players a way of setting up what's going to happen in the story in the same way that, say, Cult Divinity Lost does at the start of a session, in the way of subplots. Subplots are a thing that the players propose to the DM. DM decides if yes, it'll work, no, it won't. If it will work, then as the player pursues a subplot, and it can be something like, if you're playing Batman, maybe there's a hostile takeover at Wayne Tech. So there's the DM, the overall plot of what's going on, but maybe someone's trying to buy out Wayne Tech from under, Bruce Wayne. Cool. So then that gives some ideas to the DM to how to do that. And then, you can have sessions where it just sort of, there's a scene that's alluded to that, and the characters will get XP for that. And then you can also get scenes or whole sessions where you're resolving that stuff. And I find that really interesting because it helps, it gives the players an investment in the development of the story in a more hands-on way than just deciding what the characters want to do. And it also rewards them for doing that because you get hero points for it. So that's really cool. I've also just, at the time of recording, I'm finishing up a reread of all the appearances of Mark Shaw Manhunter from his first appearance in, I can't remember what issue of first issue special number 2, maybe? Number 11? Anyway. From his first appearance in that, through his appearances in Justice League, then in Suicide Squad, and then through his series up until the end of that series. I choose to ignore what happened to that character afterwards because he's not been treated well. But it's got me thinking about Manhunter, and then a recent Twitter interaction with a buddy of mine, Jared Rasher, got me thinking about using Grifter from the Image series Wildcats in a short kind of investigative, alien-focused kind of campaign that might be fun with a Manhunter and a Grifter, and then maybe some other peripheral types of characters from the DC or Wildstorm universe. So, and then the way that the players take ownership over the characters, those pre-made characters, is the same way you do with any other pre-made character or with any adaptation of those characters, where the animators, the actors, the directors, whatever, they make their own version of the character, which is really what's happened in the comics, ever since comics were first printed. Every author has their own take on those superheroes. So, just because you're not playing a character you created, it doesn't mean that you can't have control over how that character is played at the table and whatnot. Anyway, so that's an idea with that. Champions, I had that idea for 30th anniversary, for a 30th anniversary game, but I just, after putting the initial prep into it, it's just not a game that's jumping to the front of my, the top of my list right now. Which is fine. It's gonna be ready. I'll bet you in 2022 there's gonna be a time when I'll get fire under my feet for that, and we'll get it to the table and we'll play that one shot. But anyway, there's been a lot of chatter on amongst the player roster as well too about playing more sci-fi at the table, and there's a couple of games we've talked about, and I want to talk about those too. So those are Traveler, second edition from Mongoose, which has a new 2022 edition coming out now. Star Trek Adventures, which we ran once this year, and Starfinder. Now, each of these offers a kind of a different, very different kind of approach. Traveler is that, bare bones, the story is everything. Your characters' stats and whatnot don't really change, so it's sort of that Call of Cthulhu style play. Star Trek Adventures is a more narrative-driven thing, much closer to Acting Cthulhu. It is very cinematic, and advancement in that is not quite the same, but you do have, I think, would be very accommodating to rotating cast, because you can constantly introduce new NPCs and have them effectively like henchmen fill in when other player characters are not there. So that's pretty cool. Also, it's a really, really, really good game. I really enjoy running, prepping, writing, and running that game and running that game. In particular, there are I'm not sure when it's going to be out in print, but yeah, I think we are imminently receiving the new like Player's Handbook and GM's Handbook, which I understand incorporates again like a number of the lessons that they learned about how to structure, make different uses of the 2D20 mechanic that were in Act on Cthulhu 2D20. They've now incorporated that into the GM's guide of Star Trek Adventures, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. And then Starfinder, what that offers is the classic kind of level, experience. It's the adventuring along, getting loot, and going along. Now, I'll tell you this: the issues, not issues, but like the challenges I've had with each of these. Starfinder, I want Starfinder to feel like Star Wars Saga. I love the setting. I love the setup for the adventures. All the adventures they've published so far have been very, very, very cool. It just doesn't feel super. It feels really like it's not a heroic experience. I feel when you're playing sometimes, particularly and really only in combat. And that's only, that is partly influenced by a recent session where things went very, very badly, and we had a TPK. So take that for what it's worth. We also did run, not this year, but last year, a one-shot, or two sessions to finish off the first adventure for the Chimera, the Chimera Mystery was the adventure. It was the threefold mystery or something like that, threefold conspiracy adventure path. Anyway, whatever it's called, that was amazing. That was a shit ton of fun. Starfinder, I need to have a good experience at the table with it to get my enthusiasm back up with it. And I think there's a chance of that. This is a game that we have had a lot of people suggest that they want to try or play again. And I think the thing that my relationship with Starfinder is that we can get lost in the gameplay when we're playing it. And the setting and the things you do, and in particular the setting. Setting is just so inventive and fun, and ridiculously fun, like crazy. All the things that are great about Star Wars, about the weird aliens, and in particular the stuff that's the animated stuff where they didn't have to pay for makeup and costumes and stuff, is great and is what is fun about playing in the Starfinder setting. And the addition of elements of magic to seeing those like D&D elements through that lens, but in a very different world, it makes for such a unique experience as well. It's just so much of the game mechanics feel a little deflating. And I think there are ways to try and mitigate against that I've got some mechanical ideas for, but like the decisions that you get to make, say, for your character. The example I was thinking of this weekend is like when you hit third level as a soldier, you get to make a mechanical decision for your gear. You get a certain gear boost, which sounds cool, right? Like, awesome, I'm going to be, more badass with certain parts of my gear than what other, heroes are. And other soldiers will have their own way of being badasses. But, like, the decisions you make are things like +1 to range with your grenades, or +1 to hit with laser weapons, or +1 to damage with projectile weapons. And, like, there is technically variety that is being offered there, but they are deeply unsexy. Like they're so incremental and so minuscule. It just feels like they should be bigger. And I get that's only the third level, thing, and it is made for balance and is made to give some variety between it. But like, the character options you make when you're building your character with Starfinder, they feel deeply underwhelming as you're building your characters. And that's a completely subjective assessment of it, but it is one of the things that, and then also like at low levels, until you hit third level and you start being able to add your level or half your level to the damage of weapons, there is no shittier feeling than rolling a 1 on your laser rifle when you're supposed to be a badass soldier. You do 1 point of damage. So, it's a thing where I think that the reason I would get back to Starfinder is because of the feel when we're not focusing on the mechanics of it. The game is so much fun. Like sci-fi games are so different from a lot of the other stuff we run. So. And the rules from a DM's perspective are very easy. Like and I think you can incorporate a lot of the more, more ornate skill mechanics that you see in Pathfinder 2, like skill challenges and things like that, into Starfinder that aren't there right now to make for a good thing. And in fairness to the newest book that came out for it, actually the two newest books, Tech Manual and whatever the Explorer's Guide thing is, I have not read those cover to cover yet. So if they do add more of those types of rules in there, forgive me for not being aware of that. I don't want to speak out of turn. In spite of those shortcomings, it's still a game that keeps coming up with in recommendations or mentions from the players, and something I always want to. And it's so easy to run at the table, so easy. Like the rules in the back of the Alien Archive 1 for improvising monsters or designing your own monsters, if you're a forward planning DM, are great. So yeah, really, I think there's a good chance of us getting Starfinder back to the table in 2022, as is Star Trek Adventures. Whether they are, I think Starfinder needs to be an ongoing one so we can build up some of the, purchase and the value of the story and the setting and whatnot, to ignore some of what I feel at least are sort of the shortcomings in the rules. Star Trek Adventures, just because it's a great game, but I think Star Trek Adventures would shine most with a regular dedicated group, seeing advancements of the same people week to week, and I don't know. And also with the big crew, playing our last session, we had 6 players, and that was an astonishing amount of fun. So much fun having every station, occupied by a player character. That was great. Traveler is a great game, and we've had a great deal of fun with it. I don't know why you would choose this for a one-shot over any other type of game, any other sci-fi game, which means that you would, because there's not. There are some really interesting things in the setting and whatnot, but the system doesn't do anything particularly, there's nothing revolutionary about the system. There's nothing wow, that was a cool, a way that the outcome of the mechanics interacted with the fiction, the way that 2D20 does or Cult does. The way that Traveler shines is as an ongoing game. Really involved and fun character creation system, one of the most fun character creation systems of any RPG I've played or run, and great ongoing play. Great opportunity for a huge wide universe to explore, a huge variety of different types of campaigns to play in it. But I think campaign, or at the very least a multi-session adventure, is the way to play this game. I've got an adventure called Borderlands Run that I've wanted to run since it came out in 2018. It's a really cool mission-focused with trouble coming up along the way kind of adventure. But again, Traveler does not facilitate rotating cast at the table as much as what every other game, many of the other games that I've mentioned here do. Starfinder wouldn't do terribly well with that, but to be honest, if we can manage AD&D second with a rotating cast, we can manage Starfinder with a rotating cast. Traveler is just a little harder, I think, with that, because so much of it is going to be focused on combat in, let me expand and then just a little bit here. Combat or conflict in Star Trek Adventures or Starfinder can be tuned to be appropriate for the party you have at the table. So it's not like you have to substantially rewrite things. Traveler, not everyone's going to be good at combat. So if you are making use of combat in a session, you need to have the people there who will be able to help the party manage through it. And you just because of the nature of the game, you just don't design combat encounters in the same way for Traveler as you do for other things. So what it means is that combat, just like in AD&D or any version of D&D, if you have a rotating cast of players, there's a flexible table, and you find that you left the session in the middle of a siege, like we did recently in our Warcraft 5th edition game. Characters are invading a tower, and then you find on the game night that the people who are there are the healer and the thief. It's hard to carry on when you don't have those extra people that are there. The combat is just not going to be you can't carry on with it like that. So it's not only to Traveller. I just feel like Traveller is something where you need to have a regular cast with a regular ongoing game, and you can have a fantastic experience. Then we had a lot of fun with it with myself, Jeff, and Steve O playing way back in the day. But right now, I don't think Traveller is the thing that now, and that said, right now we're waiting for the Kickstarter rewards for the military campaign box set and the 2300 AD box set to be returned. For whatever reason, I had the 2300 AD box set back in the day. That really, really, really appeals to me, and also in part because it feels like I can run the kind of like more, closer to a contemporary kind of future, like The Expanse or like Firefly is, more so than what Traveller is, without having to get into the, the different alien races and all the other stuff that's in Traveller. Not that that's a bad stuff. It's just, it's something that I like, that kind of gritty, grittier, sort of hard sci-fi stuff. But in any event, so that's where we're at. We're definitely there is a collective desire among the player base and myself to play some sci-fi stuff next year. It's a question of what that might be. Oh boy. 2 games that I'll mention only because I talked about them in detail before. We're getting very close to the end here. Whoop. Legend of the Five Rings, the Fantasy Flight Edition, still something I really want to run, and The Witcher, something I still want to run as well too. Difficulty with The Witcher remains. So many other great fantasy games we're already playing, but The Witcher is something we've talked about possibly having as a Friday game with a core of like players who regularly make it every time, like one of them playing The Witcher, the others playing who regularly make it, supporting characters, and then everyone else sort of who can make it on given nights, they just play supporting characters, and those supporting characters can translate into more long-term characters, but we'll see. I will say that The Witcher took me so much when we ran the gaming marathon. Every player who played in that game who did not have a copy already got a copy of the Savage Worlds Adventure Edition because that's our way of sort of celebrating the gaming marathon. And those who already had it got a copy of this. So it's lots of the player base have a copy of this game, and we've had some really fun short encounters with it. It's just a question of getting it to the table on the long term. The last game I'll talk about is a late entry dark horse that's been occupying my mind. It's a game we've run once on the channel, and I did not come away with the best impression, but there is now a second edition coming out, and they have made some very clever changes to it. That game is Cubicle 7's Doctor Who role-playing game. Now, I've run the first one, and this is technically, I think this is like 1.75, because there's been, I believe, at least one other book and one box set for Adventures in Space and Time. So they're calling the new one second edition, but they've made some very, very clever changes to the game, and like they've substantially rewritten some elements of how the game plays without rewriting like the stats that you use to play it. So it's a very, very clever game. And the reason I regular viewers may know this or not, but I am a huge Doctor Who fan. In particular, good old Tom Baker was my first Doctor, and I have deeply enjoyed. I haven't enjoyed the newest series quite as much, but it's and I've not kept up on the current. But I'm a big fan of the lore, of the kind of world of the Doctor, and I'm currently in the midst of rewatching all of for my holidays. I started kicking off a rewatch of all of Tom Baker's adventures, and the newest edition. It reminds me a bit of the reasons that I find the story path system interesting is because they've taken what is a fine set of basic rules with this, and then what they've done is they've taken a hatchet to it to dramatically streamline it, and then they have added in some very clever mechanics that support player interaction with the story. to make it very easy to play. Now, one of the ways in particular, I'm just going to show you here. So this is the doctor. Whoop, where is he? There he is. Hello, doctor. And you'll see under traits there, or not traits, where are they? There's the traits. See all those traits there? Every single one of those traits has a different rule mechanic associated with it. And if you want to see it spelled out, this is the, where are you? There you go, fourth doctor. That's a list of all the rules that, situational things that the Time Lord needs to keep track of, or at least the doctor needs to keep track of. Now, that's, if you don't mind going back to that list all the time to try and find out where you get your situational modifiers, that's fine. And I think it's a perfectly serviceable mechanical way of incorporating what is a immortal kind of time traveler, right? But what the new game has said is, you know what, maybe we'll trust you to do it. They've taken out all of those things, and you now have what are called distinctions. I believe they're called distinctions. And a distinction can be like Time Lord. So you as a player and as the DM, you guys can kind of judge what a Time Lord can, like where that distinction matters. And I think that is a very, very, very clever way of doing it. And distinctions can be other things like we had an NPC in one adventure who was a Spartan warrior, or no, Athenian warrior. And, we had a bunch of like traits that we built for that to supplement that. And again, it's a perfectly fine way of doing it. But for myself, and for a game that is trying to capture the sort of wide variety of things that you can be exposed to in Doctor Who in a game, manageable way in a game, this is a great approach of just having traits effectively that you can say, all right, this applies. So you either can do something, you can't do something, or you get a bonus to something, or you get a penalty to something, and that's just, I think, it's a very, very, very clever way. I think that what I would like to see in the new edition, and I didn't see in the PDF when I read through it over the weekend, they didn't. I would like a little bit more guidance from that to especially for some canonical things, because they do provide examples of what like Sontarans. What if you have the Sontaran distinction? What that means? If you have a Ice Warrior distinction, you have an idea of what that means. I'd like to see a little bit more of that for certain other categories, but not to the degree where it's going to be like the mechanical modifiers that you see, that massive list on this. So there's that. There's also got, there wasn't really a experience point mechanic in the other version of Doctor Who. In the new one, what you do is, and this will be the last game I talk about, so we're almost at the end here. What you do is at the end of a session, you sort of make a list of the coolest thing that you think you did in the session. And if everyone agrees that's the coolest thing you did, then you get an experience point for that. And then what you do is you write down what that experience was. So it could be like, I hacked, a Dalek's sensor using my cell phone. That's a pretty cool thing. Put that down, if you were successful in doing that. Next time something comes up where that experience, you can draw on that experience, you get a bonus to that. And it's a substantial bonus. And then if it does come up and you do it again, well, then you get another experience point. You can invest in that. And at some point, you can choose to cash in that experience, that situational modifier, to just get flat XP that you use to advance your character, to just generally raise certain things. But it means you lose that experience that you could draw on. So I think I have to see it in play, whether that it is as interesting as I think it'll be. But I just think that's a really clever way of codifying the idea of genuine experience in the sense of like, I did this specific thing and now I can get better at doing that thing again in an interesting game mechanic way, while also giving a cool kind of, resource spending decision that players have to make as to whether to continue to get that modifier but not be able to raise their stats, or cash it in and then use that to get up their stats and just do more cool things. I think it'll make for a really interesting game in play that that shows progression and change in the characters that was kind of lacking in the earlier editions of Doctor Who. So because it's streamlined, because it's got that interesting experience point mechanic, and because there's a couple other neat things they seem to have done with it, with like employing an idea of advantage and streamlining the way that some of the combat or like the not combat but the conflict encounters work. It looks like it'll be a really great light on its feet game for playing a kind of Doctor Who thing. And like I was telling the guys this weekend that I feel like that is the ideal setup for a one shot for me, or for any kind of like ongoing game where you're thrown in to a situation, there's bad shit that's going on that is a mystery that you got to figure out as you go through, and then you're on to your next kind of adventure or mystery. That sounds like a shit ton of fun to me. And it's not every campaign needs to be like that, but that's great. Cubicle 7 also has a wonderful line of Doctor Who supplements for each of the Doctors that give you game mechanics and summaries and ideas for incorporating new ideas for every single episode for every single Doctor, including a really good idea for incorporating the the TV movie one. I can't remember if he's the 9th Doctor or 10th Doctor offhand. I'm losing my cred here. Whatever he is, there's the great idea for incorporating for having a whole campaign around him, and all of that stuff is compatible with the newest edition. So it means that there may be a game that I actually would enjoy running that I think would be fun to see in a campaign play and seeing characters develop. That's set in a setting that I think would be it's just ripe for great adventure. So anyway, I guess the last thing I'll say here is just man, oh man, what a great. While the year has been a challenging year in so many different ways, what an enormously fun year of playing games with great people, with other great people watching. This has been a fantastic year. It continues to be an enormous amount of fun to run games on the channel, to manage the channel, to do all the things that go into keeping the channel alive. I greatly appreciate everybody who has joined us at the table, whether as a player or otherwise. I hope that looking back on 2021 that you're able to find as many bright spots as we did, and hopefully we have contributed to some of those bright spots. You folks certainly have contributed to the bright spots in my 2021, and I am really looking forward to continuing on into 2022. This is one of particularly the people that we get to interact with on a regular basis, the people we get to play with. It's all great stuff, and it has been a wonderful part of my year. I'll check in with chat quickly too, see if there's any questions that I can answer here. Okay, happy gaming to everybody. Happy weekend to everybody as well too. Conan Conqueror. Where in the world does Rilla go? Good question, Crumb. So Steve-O is traveling right now. He has been in Peru for a number of months. I think he was going on to Ecuador next, and we haven't heard from Steve in a little while, but that is not unusual for Steve. So he is currently exploring the world in as much as one can in light of the current pandemic. So Steve, the last couple of places he's been staying, the internet has been absolute dog shit. So it's been impossible for him to join in a game in any meaningful way. So as soon as Steve has stable internet again, I'm sure he will be back, and we'll see Really go back at the table, and possibly even Steve in some other pickup games too, as his regular availability becomes more stable. So yeah, but when I talk to him, he knows that he is in the mind of many of the viewers, and certainly in all the players as well too. So we'll pass that along to him. Otherwise, folks, that has been a 2.5 hour video of what it was intended to be a little over an hour. So that's been 2021 in a nutshell. What a a bunch of great games. I'm really looking forward to more great games in the future. I hope this has answered some questions about some of the games that, we've, especially the sci-fi games, of why, we're not, the struggles we've been having with getting them to the table and the status of getting them to the table. But as is always the case, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, or otherwise, you can feel free to leave a comment in the comment section of the video. You can reach me on Twitter at Dungeon Musings, or by email at my email address is dungeonmusings@gmail.com, or you can find a link down below to join us over on the Dungeon Musings Discord server, where there's a ton of great people, ton of great conversations, and you are more than welcome to join us over there. Thank you to everybody who has joined me live through this stream or is watching it at another time. Thank you very much. I hope that you have a wonderful and relaxing holiday season, however you choose to spend it. And we will look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and happy gaming.